Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, October 16th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. A big thank you to Chris Welsh and Al Melchior for all their work, not only throughout the season, but also during my last stretch of paternity leave. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
Well, it's fun. It's a fun time to come back in the middle of the postseason, after a fantasy baseball season has ended. So I'll pass along my congratulations to anyone who did well in their leagues this year. Hopefully we had some role in that, either just by entertaining people or by actually helping. I wonder how much I can actually be helping someone if I'm not winning a bunch of my leagues myself, but it sounds like, based on some stuff I saw on Twitter, based on a few emails, that there were a few league
based
winners.
on some beer deliveries. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the beer for helping you win. I love that.
That is a nice perk to say the least. But I think we can start with some playoff thoughts, because everybody's watching the postseason. Everybody's excited about what's going on there. We'll dig into some off-season news. There's always the surgery news dump that occurs after a team's season is over. So as each playoff team gets eliminated, you find out just how hurt someone was because they invariably undergo a procedure. Many of them sort of known injuries, but a few surprises mixed in there. But some playoff thoughts. I wanted to get into Jordan Montgomery for a bit. Pitched really well in Game 1 of the ALCS on Sunday night. Just wanted to ask you, since Jordan Montgomery left the Yankees, via trade, it was the Harrison Bader trade 2 years ago now, what sort of changes has he made, both in his time with the Cardinals and now more recently during his time with the Rangers?
Yeah, ironically, given last night when it seemed at times that he was pretty junk forward, the biggest change since he's left the Yankees is to highlight the fastballs more. So since, with the Cardinals, he really ramped up the four-seam usage for a short period of time. That has gone away, but he kind of toggles that and plays with that. So sometimes he throws more four-seamers, I think, than teams expect. He's thrown the sinker a little bit more this year, and there's a little wrinkle. It's kind of interesting. He has a cutter, and by Stuff Plus, it's his best pitch, or second best pitch, second to his curve, and he doesn't throw it. He doesn't quite trust it yet. It had short sample bad results, but it was good shape and it got good whiffs. So I think the cutter would be a really kind of a perfect complement to this, and if he does ever get any better from here on out, it's due to the cutter. I do think he needs to get better. I think he's a really interesting draft for next year, because people are going to remember how good he was in the postseason. People are going to remember the ERA. I'm not sure that they're going to remember this. Jordan Montgomery had the 10th lowest strikeout rate among qualified pitchers. So, there's only 44 qualified pitchers anymore, but if you just take him and put him among his compatriots in the bottom 10, I don't think you want to be here. Patrick Corbin, Miles Michaelis, Jordan Lyles, Bryce Elder, Taijuan Walker, Dane Dunning, Kyle Gibson, Sandy Alcantara, and Jordan Montgomery. That's the bottom 10. The best ERA was Bryce Elder's 3.81, and he had like a 5.5, 6 in the second half. Dane Dunning is actually the best ERA is Dane Dunning's 3.70. He also had like a 4.8 ERA in the second half. I wonder how much different halves and maybe some, luck with homers or luck with balls in play will make people think of Jordan Montgomery and Dane Dunning as obviously better than the rest of this group. I'm not sure. I mean, it's weird to say. Like, Jordan Montgomery's done a great run. He had a great season, but where do you rank him next year?
For me, he'd still be at least outside the top 40 starting pitchers. Like, he's in the glob, the dreaded glob, as we describe it each and every year. I think the case for him, though, is that the ratios have been really good. I mean, even during his time with the Yankees, around it was Tommy John surgery that cost him all that time in 2019 and a good chunk of 2018. For the ballpark especially, he handled things pretty well. And now that he's in a place where home runs don't get that boost, you're starting to see that next level. It is interesting that he doesn't miss that many bats. We're in this era, especially where if you're not missing bats, it seems like it could really backfire on you. It almost seems like this is the best possible version of Montgomery if he doesn't increase his strikeout rate. Like, this is a very high-end 90th, 95th percentile sort of outcome for him that we've seen so far in Texas. But knowing that he has the possibility for one more adjustment with that cutter, that makes me a little bit excited about him. I'd be very curious to see where he ends up in free agency. I think trying to figure out what he's going to get in free agency, or if you're in the position of a decision maker, what would you want to give Jordan Montgomery? Part of the funny thing about the qualified pitchers list is just being on it is a skill, right? Just being healthy enough to make a qualified pitchers list has some value to major league teams. And of course,
well, Patrick Corbin's really stretching that statement.
That's a push. If Corbin were a free agent, somebody would give him a minor league deal with an invite to spring training, though. Just, we need innings.
Jordan Montgomery going to get more than Robbie Ray and Kevin Gossman? Probably. I don't know. Maybe better health record. They had way better strikeout rates in terms of platform years. I think their platform years were better in terms of how, their most recent season when they entered free agency.
We've seen more Ks from Montgomery in the past. We saw strikeout per inning stuff from him during that final season with the Yankees, and the swinging strike rates are pretty good.
Yeah, and it looks fairly durable in this environment, and more durable maybe even than Robbie Ray when he signed his deal. I think it could be around there. What did they get? They got like 5 and 125 basically.
Yeah, and I think Marcus Stroman was that same winter as well. So maybe,
and he had a lower strikeout rate, and he got like 5 and 75 or something.
Yeah, I think that might be where I would estimate, just based on how teams would view him. As 3 for 71.
There's 3
with
for
an opt out after year 2, which we just lived year 2. So Marcus Stroman.
Well, what if you just give him like give him a longer version of that?
So like 5 years, but an opt out after 3 or something.
4 and 100.
4 and 100. Yeah, that's probably. It's just
5 and 5. Maybe it's 5 125. Maybe it is a few years later. So 5 and 125 is not the same as giving Ray and Gossman 5 and 125. I think he'll slot in right there, because I think that people will think this is a more durable version of Stroman. So Stroman himself is going to probably be on the market, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing we were doing, we were getting ready for the show, looking at the potential class of free agent pitchers. There's some knowns and some unknowns with player opt-outs and team options. If you're a player with a chance to opt out as a pitcher, it would be highly unlikely that you would pass on the opportunity to go into free agency right now. There are plenty of teams with deep pockets that need pitching.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a sort of desperation. The list looks okay to me. It looks fairly healthy. If it was a normal year and I was shopping and I said, okay, the top end is Blake Snell and Aaron Nola, probably Eduardo Rodriguez is going to be out there, and you got Stroman and Jordan Montgomery. That's a pretty good top end. I mean, there's some shopping to be done there. And Sonny Gray. Let's not forget Sonny Gray. I think he goes into that group, and then you've got your bounce back guys. I think that, in terms of 1 and 15 or 2 and 15, 2 and 30 with an opt out, like Lucas Giolito is a guy that'll get something like that. Luis Severino is going to get something like that. Tyler Mahle, coming off of injury, is going to get something like that. And then you've got some interesting 1-year guys that are still trying to establish themselves, like Sean Manaea. I think might be back out there. Andrew Haney is always it seems like an adjustment away. He has such a great fastball. You're just wondering if there's just like a secondary you could give him that would get the next level. Alex Cobb might opt out. So there's a fairly good upper class, middle class, and lower class to this group of available pitchers. However, the need is, I think, pretty strong. I think that's what you're talking about in terms of like, I was just looking at the NL West, and I feel like you've got the Padres have like 3 spots. I would say that, like, people are like, oh, they've got these guys in the minors, and I've already forgotten their names, but they've got some guys that are close in the minors. But almost no team is like, yeah, we're going to like just paper these rookies into a spot in the rotation. They almost every team wants to have, like, even the Padres themselves. They did this before. You want to have 5 veterans in your rotation, and then you count on the rookies as 6, 7, and 8. And if you do that right now, Lugo's probably going to opt out. Nick Martinez may opt in, but Michael Wacha, I think, is going to opt out unless they take a 2-32 on him. That's their option. So that's a big choice to take for a guy that it doesn't stay healthy very much. So if they don't take those guys back, or those guys go on the open market, they'll have Yu Darvish coming off of surgery and Joe Musgrove, who ended the season injured, and nobody else. So they'll have 3 spots in the rotation. The Dodgers will have 2 or 3. I mean, Clayton Kershaw, he might retire.
Yeah, I mean, Kershaw is considering having another examination on his shoulder. And when he came back from the IL this year, the velo was down. We all saw what happened to him in the postseason.
His stuff was through the basement. Like, his stuff was 83 in his final starts in the regular season, in the playoffs. This is a guy who has like 105, 107, 107. Like, whatever he was saying about feeling right and just pitching poorly, he was hurt.
Yeah. It would be a very disappointing final chapter to a Hall of Fame career if this is the end for Clayton Kershaw. But sometimes that's the result of pushing yourself physically as far as you can go and having your arm go just break down before you decide to call it a career. He'll be 36 in March. I think with Kershaw, I just keep living in this space of it's the Dodgers or the Rangers or it's retirement. Those are the 3 options for him at any given time. And it's probably always going to be a 1-year deal. It's probably going to be a relative bargain based on what he does in a typical season, even if you bake in 50 to 70 missing innings.
But I think we just learned something from Brandon Woodruff, which is like, if you're a very early draft, and you're drafting right now, or you're thinking about keeper decisions right now, I think you just have to be really conservative, because he's got this extra risk that he's going to go in and they could say, he might even try to come back, and they could say, your labrum's frayed or whatever, we got to get in there. And if they do that, then you'd be lucky to get any innings from him this coming season. So, Brandon Woodruff was like kind of in that, like, I don't know, what's going to happen stage. And then he had anterior capsule surgery, which I thought that Julio Urias had labrum surgery, and it may still be, maybe these things are related, but I looked it up and it said that Julio Urias's injury was a capsule injury.
Yeah, the capsules are a problem for a couple guys right now. Brandon Woodruff could miss all of 2024 after having that repaired. And I think Kyle Wright had, if not the exact same surgery, a similar surgery on his capsule on the same day. And the thing that's really weird to me is that even if these injuries are only similar and not exactly the same, Woodruff pitched so well when he was healthy this year.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to me, it makes sense. He never looked okay in the times he tried to pitch. Brandon Woodruff looked like typical Woodruff working around it, which I think makes this all the more confusing and frustrating. Yeah.
The reason why they're immediately counted out, I was reading a study about capsule surgery, 19-month possible return.
Yeah, I mean, that puts him like maybe delayed in 2025, depending on how everything goes.
Yeah, so it's a legit one. And people who had it in their late 30s didn't really come back, or in their mid to late 30s didn't really come back. So Wright, could be more in the Urias camp where he's younger and he's going to come for that. Woodruff, I don't know what to count.
Right,
30, he's right in the middle. Is he young enough to have good outcomes, or is he on the old side? I don't know. Like, I would be very careful with him. And if I don't think in like an Anu situation, I've got him for like some bargain, $18, $21, something where it's like you would totally keep him even for a year off. If it was just Tommy John, you would just kind of nurse him through, I don't think I'm going to keep him because I just don't know. The outcomes here aren't like, oh, he's just having Tommy John, he'll be fine in 2025. It's not quite like that. So all those things are sucky and bad, but they also mean even the Brewers may want a veteran starter on the market because they've got some young guys coming up with Mizorowski and Ashby, who I think move up on draft boards a little bit because they're going to need them. They're going to need, I would say, 150 combined innings from Mizorowski and Ashby next year.
Yeah, and just to give everyone the update on Ashby, he was dealing with shoulder stuff pretty much all season. I think he threw 7 innings in games trying to get back at the end of the year, basically in a rehab assignment. The velo is just starting to come back for him. So even Ashby, to me, is more of a lottery ticket as far as your early draft goes. As far as
Mizorowski would be a lottery ticket most years because he just touched AA. But I feel like everybody in that organization is one chair closer, because of the Woodruff thing. So
yeah, Robert Gasser too. And I think when you look at a team like the Brewers, it's the sky is falling in terms of Brewers Twitter and the window's closing. Corbin Burns is gone. It's unbelievable how negative coming off of a quick postseason exit, but another postseason appearance for an organization that hasn't had a lot of success. They're in this window that's probably the most successful stretch in franchise history.
That's why I think they might keep Burns.
I think you can talk yourself into it because why would you break the band up any earlier than you have to, given how good Burns is? If you're not good, if you're underperforming, you could trade him midseason and still get something back, and it would still help your future. Freddie Peralta is really important to them now. We saw a nice second half from Freddie. I think we talked about it midseason as a guy that really deserved better results in the first half. I'm glad that worked out, and if you traded for him midseason, you got the best of Freddie Peralta. They've got outfield depth to trade from. Right, Jackson Chourio probably not far away from the big leagues. Plus the young guys they brought up this year like Frelick and Weimer. I think the big question is also Robert Gasser. Is he going to be good enough to be a big league starter and give you 5 innings consistently? Control's been a problem for him in the upper levels of the minor leagues. Can he get past that and contribute? They have done a really surprisingly good job patching holes with Wade Miley and even Colin Ray, Julio Teheran, guys that I thought would run.
They got anything out of Julio Teheran. I was like, what is happening?
I was sure it was going to be a 6 ERA, and it started.
It started
better. It started off better than it ended.
Yeah,
but that was the bin they shopped in, and they still won the NL Central. So that was pretty remarkable. But to your broader point, the optimism this time of year with pitcher injuries should be as low as it is at any point, because there's so much that's unknown. You want to start to be a little optimistic. Maybe February, March, you know, in spring training, they report.
At least get past the announcing surgery part. It's a little bit rare to announce a surgery in February. I mean, sometimes it happens, but they're trying to come back and they ramped it up and then something went pop. But most of the time you hear about it right after the season. So
early draft season,
next
alive and well,
huh? I can't believe
people are drafting a lot. I'm excited that people are drafting more at this time of year than ever before. I hope it continues to grow. And there are plenty of people out there that they love this podcast and they probably don't listen in October, and they're going to pick us up in December or January or February. And I totally understand that. But if you don't want baseball to stop, if you like fantasy baseball year round, it's finally here. It's becoming a more normal thing.
Yeah. Where do you draft Justin Verlander if you're drafting or just right now? We just saw, I thought that was I would describe it as gritty, solid, not outstanding. He didn't really have his best fastball. He only threw one fastball over 96. Him and Jordan Montgomery had the same fastball velocity. That was unexpected thing that happened in the game last night. So at the same time, his fastball is now for the year was below average stuff plus. He's obviously not exactly who he used to be because the strikeouts, the whiff rates were all down, and yet he grit his way through 160 innings and was a top 20 starter. I just don't think that I can give him automatic top 20. And when I say top 20 starter, auction calculator, year to date, Verlander, 20th or 21st, right around Kodai Senga, Chris Bassett, and Pablo Lopez, Freddie Peralta. That's the grouping he's in. And I don't know that I'm going to push him. I had him, in the top 15 to start the season. And so listen, if you draft him in the top 15 and got 21st out of him, you're not sad. That wasn't a bad outcome for you. But next year, just a little bit more risk, going further into the postseason. The fastball is just not as good. So I think that's kind of where I'd put him. 20th.
Yeah, I might even go a little lower than that. It's going to depend on a lot of risk tolerance with younger pitchers that haven't done it before. There's so many injuries though.
How many innings will he give you?
So many injuries right now. Guys that are going to miss either all of 2024 or a significant portion of 2024 that I could still see Verlander maybe 30 to 35 among starting pitchers on most sets of rankings. How many innings would you project him for? I mean, coming off Tommy John,
you're gonna push him down that far.
I mean, it may end up being higher just based on all the absences, but
okay. In this auction calculator situation, so you're taking Kodai over him.
Yeah.
Sonny finished ahead of him. You're taking Sonny Gray ahead of him.
Probably. That's closer because Sonny Gray's had a lot of injuries. They'd be in the same tier for me.
Chris Bassett? I'm not taking Chris Bassett ahead of Justin Verlander, I don't think.
I think what this becomes is it becomes an exercise of looking at the guys that were lower in the auction calculator that will throw more innings.
Who will get ahead?
Who's going to jump ahead?
Tyler Glasnow was 28th. He might be ahead of him.
Easily ahead for me. Skubal
Freddie Peralta 23rd. You might push him ahead of Verlander just because he's younger.
I would. I would. It's not me being a homer. Glasnow, I think you mentioned
Pablo
Glasnow
Lopez had the big velo increase this year. What you're just hoping for is 180 innings instead of 160. But maybe if they both throw 160 innings, Pablo Lopez's innings are going to be better next year.
I mean, here's
Lopez had 194 this year.
How about Jesus Luzardo?
Verlander in auction value?
Yeah, I don't know. So I know the value calculation formulas can vary a lot, but like Jesus Luzardo versus Verlander for next year, I think I'd be on Luzardo for sure.
Lopez didn't have a lot of wins. That's silly.
Yeah.
I don't care too much about that.
We know that's a noisy, very noisy stat.
Skubal's
ahead of Verlander for me next year.
Oh, spicy, maybe.
Max
Tanner
Fried?
Bybee? Not Tanner Bybee. Max Fried.
Bybee probably not, but Bybee's not like miles behind him. He's just behind him a little.
I don't know. When you start getting used, you were talking about 30s and 40s. Like when I look at 30s and 40s, the 30th, those players this year, Nathan Eovaldi was 35th. Tyler Wells was 36th. Jose Barrios was 38th. And then it gets kind of crazy. Like Wade Miley was 46th. Cole Reagans and Aaron Savali were 49 and 50. So I don't know that I'm going to push Verlander all the way down into 30.
Here's the other part of this.
Sort of 20 to 25 for me.
Of course, the team situation is still good. He'll be in Houston again next year. He's 41 years old. In terms of the underlying skills, like the stuff has backed up a little bit. K rate's down and the walk rate is up. Like, do you think at least one of those things goes back to previous norms? And if one of those things goes back to previous norms, how much more likely is it that it's walk rate as opposed to strikeout rate, given his age and given the decline in his stuff?
Oh, I don't know. There's a certain amount of interrelation with all this because, he threw fewer fastballs this year. And, those are the pitches that you can supposedly command. So the more he throws sliders and curves, the more he might have more walks,
Right.
But it was his worst fastball velocity since 2015. And I can't imagine it's going to get better next year. Although I guess a year out from surgery, people might point out that it could get better, but usually it's command that gets better. So I'm going to guess walk rate.
Yeah, that's where I would be too, which is fine. How would you even compare, circling back to the postseason for a minute, Verlander versus Nathan Eovaldi? We've seen Eovaldi go through, velo fluctuations and kind of wild swings and effectiveness. And of course, he's pitching very well in the playoffs. Again, I had to do a little bit of pre-show research just to see like how good is Nathan Eovaldi in the playoffs, really. And actually, he's basically from a ratio standpoint, he's John Smoltz with about a quarter of the innings. John Smoltz had 209 playoff innings in his career, which is bonkers. There's only
third
three
in playoff wins they showed was behind Verlander and I forget who's first.
Andy Pettit's got 19.
Yeah, Andy Pettit's first. Yeah.
Andy Pettit has the all-time record for most postseason innings, by the way, 276 and 2/3. Verlander 220.
To win.
Tom Glavine at 218. But anyway, Eovaldi has been excellent. A sub-3 ERA, great walk rate, great strikeout rate, has shown up in multiple postseasons now. He's only 33. I say that every time I bring up Nathan Eovaldi. He's 3 or 4 years younger than I expect because of how long he's been around, the injuries he's dealt with. How much do you trust Eovaldi with, similar flaws, but a track record that's also very good, even though it's not a Verlander type track record? Like, do you trust the walk rate to come back down for Eovaldi next year after basically a recent career worst, like a 5-year worst at 8.1% this year?
I don't know. I trust Eovaldi like unfortunately, like I trust a lot of other old veterans that I'm not sure about the innings. It's sort of the Kershaw conundrum again, where it's like, yeah, I think he'll be good for most of the innings that he's in. And I know that, 144 might look good and you add, the postseason numbers in, but Eovaldi wasn't good for all those 144 innings, it is just scary to see 2 straight years now where he starts the season at 97, 98, or, last year he started the season 98, 97, and then it was 94 to end the season. This year he started 96, pumped it up to 97 a little bit, and then was 93, 94 to end the season. In the playoffs again, he's 95.9, and he said there was a mechanical fix and some stuff he was doing differently, but this is just too much of a pattern for me to ignore. And so I would assume that next year Eovaldi will throw 100 innings I like, 20 innings I hate, and leave me in the lurch if I'm in head-to-head at the end of the season. So it's not necessarily something I'm signing up for too hard, but in like NFBC style leagues, why don't I just take the 100? It's 100 innings of good that I want, and then maybe I just drop him when he gets into that bad velo stage.
You think Eovaldi, without looking, I know you've got the player auction calculator up.
Actually dropped Eovaldi when the velo was down. I think they all nursed him along.
I think some people. I think 12 teamers. I think that's where I find the 12 team league versus the 15 team league to be a lot more difficult. Is that you almost have to cut him in a 12 and a 15. You feel like you can't. So that's a miserable spot to be. Where do you think Eovaldi ranked among starting pitchers on the auction calculator for 2023?
I think I just saw him like 30th.
Yeah, 35th.
Yeah,
right there with Jordan Montgomery, Brandon Woodruff, Tyler Wells.
And I almost exactly nailed it. I mean, that was like my ranking for him the season. It was like 35th or 38th, and it was head of everybody. And then in the midseason drafts, I was like, why? People were like, why are you low on him? I'm like, well, I was high on him, but now it's losing his velo, man. I got to point to that, So I don't know. I think he will be again similar. Back in top 30. I can't push him higher.
Totally fair. But I think it's a similar feeling that I have about Verlander at this stage.
And that's why you have Verlander a little bit lower than I do. Yeah.
Right.
I guess I could
they're both draftable. And I would also throw back the idea that if you're gonna take pitchers like this, be careful about the number of pitchers like this.
That's what I'm saying. It's the one thing I hate about it. It's a more of a normal profile. It's more of that, like, man, there are always guys that I think I could get 100 good innings out of in this draft. Who are the guys where I can get 150 or 180 good innings? Those are the guys I have to prioritize. And I guess maybe sadly, I wouldn't necessarily put either of these guys on that list.
Here's a question for you, both fantasy for next season and even from a real life perspective. If you were in the position of signing one of these guys to a mega deal, Blake Snell versus Aaron Nola for 2024, and beyond. Blake Snell ended up finishing just behind Garrett Cole, tied with Spencer Strider in terms of dollars earned by that Fangraphs auction calculator that we keep bringing up. And Aaron Nola, who by stuff, I would always wonder, like, how is he not more consistent? He seems like he'd be like the most consistent $15 to $20 pitcher year over year. And instead, he's above that range and below that range. This year he was 47th in the auction calculator. That's just weird to me. But which of these guys would you actually trust more from a long-term perspective? And of course, which one do you like better for 2024 based on how things stand right now? We don't know where they're going to pitch next year. So that's a huge variable.
Yeah. It's a tough one because so guys with good command, we did have some findings. Billy Beane mentioned this, and Jeff Zimmerman looked at it, and there was a little bit of a whiff that, guys with good command have better longevity, are injured less. And Aaron Nola, by Location Plus, is depending on where you put the selective endpoint, he's top third or first or whatever, so he's top three or first. So he definitely is a guy who commands the ball well. And the question for me is just at what point does he drop into that kind of Miles Michaelis grouping of pitchers where your stuff has dropped to the point where you're just a command guy, And if you just look at, something like fastball stuff plus for Aaron Nola, it's gone from 114 in 2020 to 95 this season. There are plenty of people who survive with that, considering that his knuckle curve is still a plus pitch and he's got other plus pitches and he has this excellent command. But, when do you become Miles Michaelis is a question for Aaron Nola, whereas Blake Snell is coming from a very high stuff perspective, but he's also riskier because of injury, riskier because this is one of the years where he actually mixed up his pitch mix the most, but that also led to a lot of walks. So, how often is he going to come out in the fourth? And how often is he going to give you 110 innings instead of 180? He seems to kind of alternate 2 or 3 seasons of 110, 120 with one season of 180. So Nola is going to be more of a guy who's going to eat up innings and be more solid. But if you were going to come down to the postseason and I could tell you both of them are healthy, which one would you want?
For just like a Game 7 situation, who do I want taking the ball?
I mean, right now Nola looks great. He's had a great postseason. It looks amazing.
Yeah. I think today the stuff is close enough where I would take Nola, but I think the problem might be that if you're right,
worse, if it goes down,
year 3 of a 6-year deal, I might feel better about my chances with Snell. So a tough question for sure. I think I would take Nola. And I think I tend to, when it comes to keeper dynasty, trying to think about what a front office should do, I would err on the side of caution and prefer Aaron Nola. But I wonder,
will you rank Aaron Nola over Blake Snell next year?
Assuming similar park situations, where it's not like something that could throw you one direction or the other. Probably
assuming
Snell
another one
Nola
signs with the Yankees.
Probably Snell, yeah, just slightly. But man, I don't know. It's a volume game. People are like, he's waffling. Yeah, I am waffling. I think you have to look back at Blake Snell's track record and remind yourself that, yes, 180 this year was great, and he's done 180 one time before. 2022, 128. 2021, 128 and 2/3. 2019,
120,
107. That's a lot of risk baked in.
And Nola is 180, 205, 193.
Yeah. This year, I mean, the worst year we've seen from Aaron Nola in the last 5, worst non-COVID year, is Blake Snell's best for innings. And I think given what we were talking about earlier with all these pitchers that have either risk because they're young or risk because they've dealt with other injuries already, I think I'm putting a premium on someone like Nola, who not only gets volume, but still does miss a lot of bats too. He's not doing it the way that peak Sandy Alcantara was doing it. Low K rate, huge volume, counting stats end up being fine.
Right.
He's doing both simultaneously. So it's tough.
I think what will end up happening in drafts is that I'll just see more Snell types, like, Glasnow, Snell, Eovaldi, Verlander are already, Snell's on the upper end of that, but it's already like, how many innings am I going to get? But they're going to be good when they're in. There's so many of those, and there's actually not that many of the Aaron Nolas, where I might, and we're talking probably, it's hard sometimes to just know industry stuff, and even ADP numbers aren't very useful right now because yes, people are drafting, but it's not a lot of sample. So it's hard to know what the industry will do, but let's assume that these are all like in the sort of late 20s, early 30s. Maybe Snell jumps into the top 15 or something in some ranks, or it was a good season, but let's assume they're all in the sort of 25 to 35 range because they could be. So I've taken a stud. What I'm going to say is, well, hey, I've got 4 guys who could give me 100 innings this year that are good, and one guy who gave me 200 in 100 innings that will probably give me 200 innings. I don't know how good they are. I think I'd rather take the 200 inning guy and just take whichever of the other 4 drops. So if I end up with, Nola and Eovaldi because I passed on Snell, like, aren't I getting more, like, didn't I do the right thing scarcity wise? You know what I mean?
I think so. I mean, I think you can make an argument that from a stage of his career perspective, there's nothing that prevents Blake Snell from topping 200 innings other than his own efficiency. Like, part of the reason he doesn't get there if he's not hurt is because he walks a lot of guys. Pitch count goes up, innings count suffers as a result of that. But again, the scarcity aspect of this, yes, you can very easily look at a typical Blake Snell season. Again, look at 21 and 22 instead of 23. Look at the innings, look at the ratios, look at the Ks, and say, hey, wait, those young stud pitchers that I'm really worried about, either the time they're going to get called up or how their innings will be managed, they're more likely to do that than anybody else I can draft in that range is likely to match what Aaron Nola does, because there are actual restrictions that keep those guys from being able to get to Nola's recent volume floors.
And those innings matter. Blake Snell in 2022, I just ran the auction calculator, 50th best pitcher by fantasy. You might look at that and be like 3.38 ERA with all those strikeouts. Awesome. But the 120 innings matter. It made him a 50th best as opposed to, and yes, you can add in what you get off the wire, blah, blah, blah. But like that becomes very specific to your league. And most of the time when you're drafting, I think at least the top 3 pitchers, you're hoping for an all year pitcher. You're hoping for 180 innings. And so, yes, those pitchers that kind of you put the over under at 120 innings or whatever, those will be interesting drafts next year, considering how many injuries we had this year. The fact that the offensive, the league is an offense, like the offense league wide went up. And so it made it even harder to put together a pitching staff. Like, yeah, it's going to be really difficult when you're, looking at a second and third starting pitcher to push the button for a guy who might give you 100 innings.
Yeah. So a debate that will likely rage on through position preview season and probably through like the winter meetings from a real life perspective too. I could see that.
I don't know what more we can learn. I guess, this postseason, if you're looking for something to learn, I think, and it's not sexy and it's not exciting, but I spent a lot of time talking about it in my live blog yesterday. Sometimes fastball velos, because, Jordan Montgomery pushing his fastball velo to some of his best numbers. Like, what if he averaged 94 next year for the season? That would be something newish. It seems possible given the velos he's throwing right now. And it seems on the other side, it seems possible that Justin Verlander could spend next year averaging under 94. So I'd be interested to see how his velo looks in his next start out. I'd be interested to see what Max Scherzer's velo is when he comes back. see how bad that shoulder injury was and how quickly he can bounce back from it, and how hard he can throw. It's it's better than focusing too hard on the results, and just be like, Jordan Montgomery, he's an ace, Well, there's a thing out there. I think it's Petriello, but somebody has a heat map of where Montgomery threw a sinker last night, and it was like 80% shadow, and shadow is this zone that's like not the heart of the zone and not outside of the zone. It's those edges,
all the edges, yeah.
And so he threw a ton of sinkers, and like if you're watching the game, you know that was true. Like there were so many sinkers just on the black, just inside. There was one where Nate Lowe like sort of hopped out of the way and it was like, oh damn, that was a strike, and like so many of those that were just perfectly placed. And I don't know, yes, that demonstrates good command, but doesn't that feel a little bit tight-ropey? It's like if he doesn't throw 80% sinkers in the shadow range, does he get blasted? Because there was some hard contact. So I don't know.
Right. And I still think we're seeing an outcome based on how he's pitching right now that is a very, very favorable outcome for a good but not elite pitcher. Like he's getting closer to elite results than he should with the stuff that he currently has. That's not at all throwing shade at him. He's showing up the best possible time, but it makes it tough to evaluate him for the future. You had something in a live blog last week. It would have been Twins Astros. I think it was the game the Twins got eliminated in. And you wrote that the Astros might have been sitting slow. And that might have been how they hit Sonny Gray, because Sonny Gray's best pitch, Savant has him at 6 different pitches, has been the sweeper. And the Astros maybe effectively took that away. And I was wondering, how often do teams try and take away an opposing pitcher's best offering by using an approach like that? And what's the downside? Like, does the downside of that approach vary? Does it hurt you more to sit slow if Sonny Gray has a better fastball? Like, does Sonny Gray's fastball just being kind of okay, velo-wise, make it possible for you to sit slow and use the approach the Astros used more effectively?
Sonny Gray had the best sweeper in baseball this year. The batting average on it was 0.97. He threw a 576 of them. The batters hit 0.97, 118 slugging with a 53% strikeout rate.
That's really good.
It is sort of amazing to think that the Astros might be like, yeah, let's sit on that pitch. But what they did see, I think, was that Sonny Gray in his postseason start before, ramped that sweeper usage up to 40%. And once you start throwing a pitch 40 or 50% of the time, this is the fastball thing, you can anticipate it. And now you're anticipating it, you're keying into it, you're swinging at that velocity that's sitting slow, you're putting yourself in the best position to succeed. And you're taking advantage of something that's actually predictable, where the whole job of the pitcher is to remain unpredictable. So, over the course of a season, I think Sonny Gray would easily correct this. Like he would see like, oh man, I've been throwing the sweeper. People are sitting sweeper. Okay, time to break out more curveballs. And I just think in the game, they didn't adjust fast enough. There's because they're like, with every one of those sweepers, you're like, well, was that just a hanger, quote unquote? Was that like just caught too much of the zone? Or was he anticipating it? And so if it's a hanger, you think, well, I just can't hang one like that again, and you're like, got to bury these more. If I was the catcher, I might be like, hey, let's, and they did do a couple sort of freeze, called strikes on fastballs that seemed like maybe they were figuring out. But in the end, he gave up 6 hits on sweeper, which with a 0.91 average is not, I can without looking tell you that didn't happen all year.
It seems impossible that it could have, given how amazing that pitch was for him throughout the year. But I just thought that was a really interesting thing that came up on the broadcast that I happened to see in that live blog that you were working on last week. Speaking of the Twins, Byron Buxton had arthroscopic knee surgery, and I don't know if I believe them, but the Twins are insisting that Byron Buxton will be able to play center field. And I kind of think for me, unless they knew he needed this surgery like all season long, and their way of managing it was DH, off-season surgery, it gives him enough time to recover, and then he can be Byron Buxton defensively again. If that's what they had in mind the whole time, great, good for them. I thought they were trying to save him for the second half of the season. That was not the plan. For me, it's more of I will believe it when I see it. So now from both a fantasy and real life perspective, we're looking at this guy that the most exciting facet of his game is still on hold, right? He's a fantastic center fielder when he can play out there. I don't know if he'll be that guy if he does play out there again with all the injuries he's dealt with over the course of his career. And from a fantasy perspective, it's a UT only bat on a guy whose injury history is unfortunately about as full as any position player in the game during the time that he's been in the league.
Yeah, no, it's, we say that we're not that great at predicting injury and don't want to put the injury prone tag on anybody, but I think you can put it on him.
Yeah, it's a combination of bad luck and other factors, but it's what he's got.
Just too stark. You have 1 year with the 500 and not even another year where over 400 plate appearances. It's pretty obvious. The thing that's fascinating to me is like, if you just take the counting stats off and the plate appearances off, like he's had some good seasons in the last 3 years. Despite being really small sample in terms of plate appearances, like he did 306 with 19 homers and 9 stolen bases in 2021. Even with the lesser batting average in 2022, he hit 224, but 28 homers and 6 stolen bases. And even this year with a 207 and 17 homers and 9 stolen bases, if you don't look at the runs and RBI, that's a player that's valuable in AL only leagues, right? Mm-hmm. So what's fascinating to me is like this player has fantasy value. Maybe it's just DFS when he's healthy and he's in. But is there a format? Is there a format where you would draft him and even think about wanting to draft him and maybe putting the extra buck on it? And what I'm putting forward is maybe it's AL only, because even if he just gives you 207, 17, and 9 again, something like that, that's valuable in AL only. You may not spend that much to get it. And then there is still the superstar chance of, 450, 500 plate appearances and 30 home runs and 10, 15 stolen bases. Like there's still a non-zero chance of that. I mean, it gets smaller and smaller every year. So is AL only the place to consider him, like really deep leagues? Is that where he is now?
Yeah, it's almost counterintuitive because replacing players in those deep leagues is so difficult. But I think the price has finally come down enough on Buxton where expectations are across the board a partial season. And because the skills at their peak are so far away from the skills at their floor, I think we've reached the point where if you're an AL labor in March, late February, and Buxton comes up, you're probably talking about single digits for what he goes for in a salary cap situation, right?
I'm interested because you know what else goes for single digits? Lefty platoon outfielders that might get you 450 plate appearances.
Yeah. I mean, $7 to $9 on Buxton could be enough to actually get him. It probably depends on when he's thrown out and a couple things like that, but it makes sense because the underlying numbers, the barrel rates have been good 4 seasons running. He's been more patient the last 2 seasons. Like the approach is just a little better than it was, even though he strikes out a lot. 30% works when you hit the ball as hard as Byron Buxton does. And even with a knee problem all season, 9 for 9 is a base stealer.
Still stolen.
He's a very efficient base stealer. So you don't have to draft him expecting the pie in the sky season anymore. You can just draft him as a last outfielder who's UT only for the start of the season, of course.
Yeah, I think I could get with him even at NFBC because he might drop all the way to bench rounds.
Right now, 2 drafts just in the last few weeks that are in the ADP report. ADP's 295 overall.
Where does the bench start? Like who's he around?
It's like Tommy Pham, Max Kepler.
Yeah.
Luke Raley. Yeah, those are like in and out of the lineup type players.
I might take Buxton there.
Yeah, if he stays down there. And I think until until there is some
There's
kind of
always
indication.
the yearly cycle of hype with him.
That cycle can't begin until spring training at the earliest.
Get some good health news.
If he's actually playing center field in the Grapefruit League and he has an amazing spring, then there can be some helium. But the helium would bring him from the pick 300 range to what? Pick 200 at most? He's not going to crack the top 200.
You can't forget the rest of the plate appearance numbers.
Of course not. So I hope he's healthy. I hope this actually gets the job done for him. But it's just one more line on a very crowded injury ledger. And the same could be said for his teammate, Alex Kirilloff. I just saw he had surgery on his right labrum. That injury popped up in July, kept him off the playoff roster. And we know Kirilloff has had wrist surgeries in recent years. And I'm at the point now with Kirilloff where I think I'm just, you think about him more as like a cheap keeper, dynasty league sort of guy on the bottom of your roster. I don't even know if I want to wait it out right now. I think I just want to let somebody else burn that roster spot. And if he makes it back healthy, which we always hope players do, at that point, I could be excited about him again.
There's a fairly boring, strikeout rate barrel combination here that's developed. It's kind of strange. We're talking about a guy who basically over the last 2 years has put together 2/3 of a season with a 25% strikeout rate and a 7% barrel rate.
Yeah.
It's just a weird combination that I would not get excited about unless it still had that Fangraphs 50-60 hit tool grade, sitting on the same page as that, where you're like, okay, he could get that strikeout rate down, and a 7% barrel rate works if he strikes out 20% of the time, gives you 280, 290 average with it, I'm
still, from a skills perspective, a believer, but I think the injury situation is so bad that's right, what's holding me back.
I wasn't even talking about the injury aspect.
Yeah. I think the chances that he lowers the K rate are still there, and he makes a lot of hard contact. Hard hit rate, brief time at AAA this year, Kirilloff was there, 48.1% hard hit rate. It's ridiculous. And we've seen flashes of that even at the big league level around all of these injuries. I think the injuries have a big influence on
Labrum's a big
why
one.
That barrel rate hasn't been there. Labrum's a big injury to come back from. The other big news in baseball right now, this was a shocker that came across on Monday morning. Kim Ng has chosen to part ways with the Marlins. There was a mutual option in her contract. She decided not to exercise it. There was a statement that Kim Ng released that outlined some of the reasoning behind it. And it sounds like it was more about the ownership's lack of interest in investing in baseball operations the way that Kim Ng wanted them to. So this is pretty interesting because there are other teams looking for GMs right now, including one in Boston where she has previously worked. Kim Ng's resume, we talked about it when the Marlins hired her as the GM back in 2020. It's 2 resumes full of qualifications to be a GM. So she's got plenty of places she could go next. This seems like a pretty big blow for the Marlins, though, coming off of a playoff appearance and having so much positive momentum outside of that Sandy Alcantara injury.
The most wins in the last 10 years or something for the Marlins in a season. Definitely, and it doesn't seem like when she talks about, different visions for the future, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is, major league investment, but she did manage to convince ownership to push payroll from 84 million in 2022 to 110 in 2023. And, that manifested in, not every signing was great, but, you got the Cueto signing, some of the additions that they did in trade, like the Josh Bell addition. I think, they did trade away Segura, but like in that, I think they ended up taking on some money. And at least the chance that Bell opts into $16.5 million in 2024. So there was definitely some investment in the major league product, but the other things that can turn one sour on ownership is meddling, which I don't know if that would come up in a contract negotiation situation. He knows exactly how much he's going to meddle. She's not going to ask him during a contract negotiation, "Are you going to meddle less?"
No, you get that exposure from working.
Yeah, that just from yeah. So then there's personal investment. So like she might have asked, "Hey, don't make me a lame duck GM next year. We just had some success. Extend me. And he said no. Or investment in non-major league stuff. So sort of investment in the minors, investment in player development, investment in staff. I need more analysts. I need more this. I need more that. So, those are the different ways that ownership, that the GM and ownership might come to head to head. And I think that maybe it was investment in the team at large that would show if you invested in me in a 2 or 3 year deal. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
Invest in me in a 2 or 3 year deal so that I feel that I can believe you when you say that you have a commitment to investing more in the team largely. If you are not going to give me a 2 or 3 year deal, then I don't even believe you that you're going to invest anymore, because I will be a lame duck GM. And so, anytime I come to you asking for something, we don't even know, we don't have a relationship beyond 2024. You know what I mean? So it probably came down to an extension, but that extension meant a little bit more probably given other context.
Given the state of that division, the core Atlanta has in place, what the Phillies are doing right now, how they spend, the Mets and their long-term intentions to spend, well, they've already done it, but to spend as much as any franchise in the league. If you go to ownership in Miami and say, look, here's what we're up against. Mm-hmm. We need more. And that question could be asked 1,000 different ways, but the answer is effectively, no, we're not going to get to that level. You might know, like, we're just not going to consistently hit the goals we're trying to hit in this division, given who 3 of the other teams are. And that doesn't even mention the Nationals as another team that could pretty consistently outspend the Marlins. Historically has done a lot in free agency and has a nice core of young players coming up right now too. So yeah, I think choosing carefully and being able to possibly go out and get another job. I'm really curious to see if Kim Ng ends up in Boston or somewhere else before long. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how this ends up playing out. But did not see that coming.
Well, yeah. What was the other surprise you mentioned where, the White Sox surprised us by locking up Chris Getz so early, but they could have had a choice of Kim Ng or who's
Chaim Bloom.
Chaim Bloom. Yeah, that was sort of a surprise. So
right. I think you and Britt sort of laughed at me for saying, hey, maybe the guy that wasn't in charge has some new ideas, even though he didn't do particularly well in the role that he had in the organization. Right? You don't think of the White Sox as this beacon of great player development.
He did hire some interesting guys. Did you see he hired Brian Bannister?
Did not see that, but that's an interesting hire. Yeah.
They were all former players.
All former players, probably
They're
players
all former
with.
players, but they were former players that had been in analytics roles and were a little bit more analytics forward. So, I was the Bannister hire was an interesting one. I circled that a little bit.
Well, what I want to see for the sake of White Sox fans is I want to see new people brought into the organization with new ideas and a new approach, because if it's more of the same, of course, you're not going to shake things up all that much. But had they waited, I don't think there were other teams based on subsequent reports and everything. I don't think Chris Getz was necessarily going anywhere. So I don't think they had to hurry quite as much as they did. And they missed out on opportunities to hire some, potentially likely higher ceiling candidates that have come available in the time since. But hey, Jerry Reinsdorf had a plan. He went ahead and stuck to it. One other Marlins thing, Jazz Chisholm had a turf toe procedure. That was expected throughout the season. He actually had a good year playing through that injury plus others. 19 homers, career high by 1, 22 steals, one off his previous career high there. 97 games played. This is becoming a problem for Jazz too. Some of it's maybe the way he plays makes him more susceptible to injuries, but he had an oblique injury in July. He had a toe injury in May. Both of those things put him on the IL. Had a minor shoulder injury back in April, and this toe thing that was there for a good portion of the season. So I'm curious if you are at a point with Jazz where you say, yes, there are injury profiles I run away from at early-ish mid-round prices, but there's enough he's done well around these injuries where I want to give it one more shot with Jazz in 2024.
Yeah, I'm not quite going to throw the the Byron Buxton tag on him yet. I mean, it's just not quite the same length of time with these problems. He has a 507 plate appearance on his ledger in 2021, and then 241 and 383 after that. Jazz does, and so I feel like he could have a 507 again. Like that wouldn't be crazy. Also, the difference between him and Byron Buxton on some level is age. Byron Buxton is already 29. And that means he has, yes, this longer track record. You see all these injuries, but also just means with injuries, it's gonna be a little bit more of a bounce back and a little bit more of a stretch to think of a 650 plate appearance year. Whereas a 25-year-old Jazz Chisholm, like if he had a 650 plate appearance year this year, it would be a little bit out of the norm, but it wouldn't be crazy. So it would just be like, oh, finally he had that final healthy year. And if he does do that, then I would see 28 homers. I could see 30-30. Yeah.
I think with Jazz, it's like the underlying numbers improved in 2022 in terms of the barrel rate and hard hit rate jumping. And he held some of those gains in barrel, 12.2% this year. And it's easy to say, well, maybe the injuries are part of the reason why he didn't fully repeat. That's at least possible. Mm-hmm. But he also made slightly better swing decisions for the second year in a row. He cut that O swing percentage down to 28.5%. It's the second year in a row he's pushed that in the right direction. That makes me think that the walk rate is at least steady where it's at right now, but there's still some room for improvement there. From a real life perspective, that adds the value, just getting him on base more to steal more bases, but also to score more runs. So I think this is still, it's the type of profile that could be a very much like too risky for me in the future, but I haven't seen enough either. I think if he's going pick 60 to 75, so like late round 4, somewhere in round 5, 15-team league. Does that seem fair for you for Jazz?
Yeah. Let me do something real quick. I'm just going to this is like ROS. I don't think it has next year in it yet. Yeah, what is this? I don't even it says Bryson Stott has 13 plate appearances projected and $128 value. So I don't think this is useful. But I guess what I'll do instead is just look at earned value for 2023 in terms of second baseman. You're talking about Betts going first, Simeon and Albies going next, Nico Horner up there, and then you've got the second base quote unquote blob maybe, which might be Ketel Marte, Luis Arias, Gleyber Torres, and Jazz.
But Jazz outfield only now.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out. So now Jazz goes up against Randy Arozarena. No, Arozarena is higher than that. TJ Friedel was 23rd. George Springer. George Springer or Jazz Chisholm next year?
Jazz. A lot of ways for it to go right for Jazz.
So maybe that's a good would you rather. George Springer is definitely somebody you would pencil in for more plate appearances. He's also 34, and you don't know how many homers you're going to give him.
How about Jazz versus Seiya Suzuki? I mean, Seiya Suzuki is just a really good all-around player. 285, 357, 485. Popped the 20 homers. Was not efficient as a base stealer in a season when everybody could steal a lot of bases, but quite a few things did go right in year 2 for Suzuki. Some
injuries situation with Seiya. I'm a little surprised he got the 583 plate appearances, given what my personal interaction with him was on my teams. I think I'd take Seiya, but the shape of Seiya's production is a little bit more replaceable. Although I don't know if that's true anymore in the age of the hyper stolen base environment.
Here's another one for you. Dalton Varsho Also now, of course, an outfield only. Dalton Varsho versus Jazz Chisholm. Dalton Varsho has stayed very healthy, took a big step back in year 1 with the Jays. Upside
I'm taking
being
Varsho. I'm taking Varsho.
Bounce back.
I like
the
it.
counting stats could be so good for Dalton Varsho too in that lineup.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess in some weird way, like, he never really had a great hard hit rates, but they're pretty good hard hit rates. He never had great barrel rates, but they're pretty good barrel rates. He has pretty good max EV. He has 27 homers on his resume. He steals bases. I mean, we're just looking for like a slight adjustment in the offseason. And you would pencil him in for 550 plus plate appearances either way, right? And 20 homers and 15 stolen bases either way. And then you're talking about upside beyond that.
I wonder what the categorical ceiling in batting average is for Dalton Varsho, because Jazz hits the ball harder on a regular basis at this point. And
but
the power
Varsho
speed blend,
balls in play.
I mean, in basically 2/3 as many games, the power speed combo from Jazz Chisholm was right there. And I think hitting the ball harder gives you a better chance of doing more on average for Jazz too. So unless you think Varsho, because of the K rate difference, is going to spray the ball all over and hit 260, 270, because of that, I got to take Jazz. I think there's even with the injury concerns, I think there's quite a bit more to like in the
one of the things
quality.
I was doing with Jazz and with Buxton and all them was papering over runs and RBI with my hand and getting really excited about everything else. And I just have to push back with Varsho. Like, even if he doesn't hit 260, the strikeout rates, that lineup, it should produce more runs and RBI. So now I'm giving plate appearances and runs and RBI. And plate appearances is not normally a category, but even among the 5 categories, I'm giving runs and RBI to Dalton Varsho off the bat.
I feel like we got our first 2024 bet brewing here. I think Jazz beats him in those counting stats too.
Even in runs and RBI.
Yeah, because I think of the difference in where they're going to hit in their respective lineups. I think, quality of the lineup difference certainly favors Dalton Varsho, but
plate appearances,
that works against Dalton Varsho.
I'm taking the plate appearances in the better lineup. So
I love it.
Varsho's runs and RBI. So if I'm taking runs and RBI for Varsho, then you got the other 3 categories, and I could see Jazz taking those 3 categories, which means that overall maybe you should take Jazz, but you can see why it's difficult.
Oh yeah,
those plate appearances also give you more chances for the home runs and stolen bases.
Yeah, even as bad as this season was for Dalton Varsho, he still popped 20 homers, stole 16 bases. So it could have been worse, believe it or not.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got an episode for next week sort of written in pencil. If you have unusual hitter seasons that you'd like us to talk about, send us a tweet at Rates and Barrels, or you could email, I guess, to ratesandbarrels@gmail.com. Just let us know which unusual hitter seasons you're most interested in hearing us discuss. We'll put some of those names on the rundown and talk about a bunch of guys that are very confusing coming off of 2023. We may have introduced a few of them over the course of this episode, just sort of organically, but we'll get to some more names on next week's episode. So if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the like button on this video. If you're not watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There could be some fun stuff that randomly shows up there someday. You never know. We've got big plans for the future. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Enosaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you next week.
Thanks for listening.